What is going on, FA Nation? My name is Justin Fensterman, along with Howard Bender, and this is another edition of Fantasy Alarm Sports Talk. Howard, it's a great time to be alive, my man. All the sports going on. We were dreaming of this day 5 months ago. Now it's a reality, and we're getting ready to help everybody win some rings this season.
We definitely are. It's a little overwhelming right now, Fancy. I did on Monday night. I had 2 drafts simultaneously while during the Fantasy Alarm show. I had 2 drafts simultaneously last night. I signed up for one of these DraftKings best balls like early this morning, and all of a sudden it just started right before we were on. I have another draft tonight for the Fantasy Alarm Staff League. And I mean, it's crazy. It's unbelievable. If it wasn't for the fact that my Yankees are just crapping the bed right now, I would be totally immersed in every sport, because I am getting into the NBA semifinals here right now, and I'm watching all that real close. But dude, football drives the bus. Football.
That's right.
Sing it,
pays
baby.
all our bills. That's right. By the way, Howard, just for the Elias Sports Bureau, they just contacted me or my IFB and wanted me to just say that this is now the second straight live stream that Howard Bender and I have been on together, where Howard is drafting and live streaming. That's multitasking at its finest right there, Howard.
Terrible.
I have not been in that position. I'm scared for when that day comes, man. You've had plenty of practice, though.
I mean, I definitely have had plenty of practice. I would prefer to, be able to focus my attention on it. Like, I'm sitting here, I got like the cheat sheet here from Fantasy Alarm all printed out just so I can see the bye weeks right now, because for whatever reason, DraftKings on their platform, there is no draft board. There is no there are no bye weeks listed on players. I'm like, really? You're DraftKings. Come on.
Yeah, I don't understand that. You see it just about everywhere else, so I mean, why would DraftKings have that available to you? Howard, speaking of bye weeks, when it comes to drafting a team, how much do bye weeks influence your drafting? For instance, if you're going best player available and it just so happens now you've got 3 of your first 6 players have the same bye week, do you sweat that, or do you view it as just 1 week? You'll find players throughout the season to bridge the gap. How do you handle that situation? How should us as fantasy players handle it?
I mean, I don't sweat it all that much. I don't think you can sweat it because of, the way the bye weeks are structured this year. I mean, it's like weeks 8, 9, and 10 are like really tight. They've got a lot of guys. Week 8 has the most teams. Oh, week 13's got a bunch. Week 11, has a bunch there as well. My feeling about it is, Fensty, is that I am perfectly fine struggling for 1 week, and I'm not going to give up a talent best on the board if he's got the same bye week as one of my other guys. I'll make it work. I'll maneuver around there, because again, listen, if it's 1 week that you have to sit there and struggle, and if you lose that 1 week, okay, fine. I mean, it's not the end of the world. Nobody needs to go undefeated through the regular season. I mean, unless your league has some sort of prize that awards you for going undefeated in the regular season, it doesn't mean squat. Sure, you want the bye week for the first week of the playoffs, but for the same token, it's not important there. Your goal in the regular season is just to make the playoffs. You don't have to win the season.
Right, exactly. And with that, because here's the thing, I think not everybody, but when a lot of people are drafting, and I've noticed it from friends as well, they think, this is it. This is the team. This is my team. But that's not how it's supposed to be. You don't get an extra prize. You want to talk about extra prizes. You don't get an extra prize or payout or anything like that for making 0 moves in a season. That's called luck right there. You're supposed to make moves even when your team is doing well. And that's one of the things that on Alarm After Hours in SiriusXM, Adam Ronis and I have been screaming at all of you about, is that just because your team might be 2-0, 3-0, that doesn't mean you just take a vacation from waivers. You should have a spot that's interchangeable, essentially, where you don't feel pressure that your roster's frozen and you can regularly pick up someone who's trending up and drop them regularly with ease without having to feel that pressure. I feel like, Howard, people forget about the other half of the battle, which is in-season management.
I mean, it's really important, but I think, in all honesty, I think one of the things that people make a huge mistake on waivers is that they make moves just for the sake of making moves. You got a guy who's kind of underperforming through the first 2 weeks, and then they want to drop him because they've got the flavor of the week who suddenly had, 2 really solid games. But then what happens? Then all of a sudden that guy comes back to earth because the quarterback's gelling with the other receiver or whatever the case may be. And that guy you just dropped just needed a couple of games to get his feet wet. So, I worry about, people making these lateral moves for no good reason, other than the fact that they hate sitting on their hands and hate not making roster moves. So, for me, it's always, I don't care how many moves you want to make during the course of the week. Even here right now, today's Wednesday, so there are a lot of waivers going through already. Scott Fishbowl waivers has already been processed. So, make moves with a purpose. Don't just do it for the sake of throwing bid money at a flavor of the week. Really understand what the role is and why this player is excelling, and see whether or not he really truly is better than the guy you're dropping.
And I'm glad you mentioned bid money, because this is where our conversation kind of forks a little bit. And there's still a lot of leagues, and I really don't know why. You got to make the change, though. I believe a lot of sites have it as the default still waiver priority instead of fab. So I figured we could just cover both avenues here. And this is why I don't like waiver priority. So much pressure and so much responsibility comes from having the number one claim. And it's very hard in fantasy football to determine when to use that number one claim. And that's the problem. That's the main problem I have with waiver priority. People will just sit on it the entire year. Then you don't have a chance at picking up a player if you're not moving up at the top 4 or sitting. That's control out of your own destiny. Whereas with fab, there's a little bit more room and it's more open-ended where you have a legit shot at getting a player via bidding. Howard, I don't know how you feel about waiver priority. I'm completely out on it as the main way. As a tiebreaker to fab, I'm totally fine with it.
As a tiebreaker for fab, you could just use best record or least total points, whatever you want to do with something like that. I mean, that's definitely, I'm not a big waiver priority guy. I see a lot of people hoarding that first waiver priority for waiting for that, first running back to, injury to happen. I mean, on one hand, they're kind of screwed because they're not altering the rest of their roster. On the other hand, if they don't have to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And you might as well just sit and wait for that to happen there. I mean, it's what I hate more about waiver priority is the league where it resets every week.
Oh,
it's like you've got the number one waiver priority, but you didn't make any moves. And then all of a sudden it resets the following week for no good reason.
Right. And that goes back to what you were just saying. Don't force yourself to make moves. And that adds that extra pressure. It's almost like bullying you. It's cyberbullying almost. The computer's almost bullying you to make a move just so you can feel better about using that claim. And that's, again, why I don't like it. And it's very hard in other fantasy sports. I'm still not okay with it, but I'm more accepting of it. Longer seasons, there's more changes when it comes to moving up and down, and people will still sit on that waiver claim in other sports. But in fantasy football, there won't be that much when it comes to movement on the waiver claims, whereas in other sports with a longer season, you will get more of a change. That's been one of my biggest arguments against waiver priority. But people, Howard, they refuse to accept change. And this is a change that's better. Fab over waiver priority.
I definitely prefer fab over waiver priority. I think it is, I mean, for lack of a better way to say it, I think people are scared of using fab. And that's really what it comes down to. It's a little bit more savvy. You don't want to blow your wad all the way in the early part of the season. You want to hold something back to see what happens later on in the year. I just, it's more work. Listen, we go through this back and forth all the time. There's fantasy baseball and fantasy football. And most people who play fantasy football who hate fantasy baseball, why? Because it's too much work. The season's too long. It's too complicated. I got to know too many players. The rosters are too big. Now you want to get those people into fab bidding and like understanding all of that. I mean, it is, Bob from accounting is not a happy camper when he has to, when he's like, oh man, I really want James Robinson. I only have $100 for the season, but I'll just put 52 on him and just make sure I lock him in, right?
I don't know who knows Bob in accounting better, you or John and Pemba, who's producing our live stream today. You guys talk about him an awful lot. You must know him very, very well, but that's very true. People don't want to do more work. It's the same argument when it comes to snake draft versus auctions. Auctions take an hour longer, boo-hoo, but that's what it takes to properly invest into your team in season as well. And for all those that are doing things the right way with Fab, let's talk about a few strategies on how to spend, because Howard, this will be a teaching moment from you to me as well, because I still don't feel like I have a great handle on spending Fab, because for me, I'm more conservative with it because I'm always thinking I'm going to be competing at the end and I want to leave some money. Some years it's benefited me. Other years, it's hurt me, and that's where I'm still trying to find the balance at least 5 years later after first messing with Fab.
I mean, it's really, number one is it doesn't matter if you have $100 or $1,000. You have to think of it in terms of percentages for bidding, okay? Because there are some people who are like, I got $1,000 for the year. I'm only going to put like $16 on this guy. That's 1.6% of your budget. You're not getting Brian Edwards or James Robinson for 1.6% of your budget. Like these guys, and we make sure that we do this over at Fantasy Alarm. When Dan Malin does the waiver wire article, it's about what percentage you're bidding your total dollars on for this. So you always have to look at it in terms of that. Now, how aggressive to be, how not aggressive to be, I mean, that's the way that's your style. It depends on who the players are out there, how badly you need them. If you feel like you had a great draft and you've got one, maybe two spots on your bench where you're like, yeah, I could probably swap out, I used my last pick on Tyrell Williams. I can drop him. AJ Dillon, who knows what his role is really going to be. Brian Edwards is out there, so, I mean, if you had a really good draft and you only have a spot or two that you have to fill, don't be overly aggressive on it. We don't know what Brian Edwards is going to do. We're not sure yet. I get that, there's upside and there's buzz, throughout, the industry on him. But, I mean, to sit there and blow your whole budget there, you have to know when really to be aggressive. And that's one of the reasons why I always keep a free agent bid log. So that I keep track of what everybody bids each week. So I know who's bidding in odd increments, who's bidding with just, $1, who's using even numbers, who's throwing bids every single week on wide receivers, who's throwing bids every single week on tight ends. A lot of people end up like rotating out, tight ends, and they're blowing through their fab on those players. You have to know that, because then all of a sudden, if you have a need for a tight end, you know who you're bidding against, and you can look and see what their style is.
And that's amazing that you brought that up. And Ronas and I were talking about that as well. Knowing your opponent is very important. And I feel like that's something that we as an industry don't talk about enough. And it's little things like I used to talk about in draft season. Start talking to your friends a little bit. And for next draft season, get to them early. Find out players they like. Write it down. Take a note in your phone. I've done that, and it's helped me out tremendously over the last few years. But with what you said, Howard, the bidding log, and that was going to lead me to my next question. How do you handle bidding? Do you use those crazy random numbers like, let's just say 69, or do you go after an even 10 or 20?
I never do like even numbers. You shouldn't do even numbers because, I mean, if you get a couple of people who do it, you run the risk of tying. A lot of people do the 1, they'll do the 11, they'll do the 16, that kind of a situation. So that tilts me towards the 2 and the 3, depending on how savvy the group is. In the league. I mean, I've got a bunch of knuckleheads out there, then I'm not going to worry too much about the 3 versus the 2. I mean, I'll just put the 2 on there and feel good. But you never bid in even increments. Never do, $5 increments. Never do 25. Never do 30. Always kind of mix it up a little bit. But one thing that you always have to make sure that you're doing is from week to week, you're mixing it up, because if somebody's tracking you and they see that, you're always doing 16, you're always doing 26, you're always doing 36. If you're always doing that, they're just going to put the 7 there just to make sure that they get you. So you always have to kind of mix up your bidding as you're going through it.
And again, great points that you're making. I mean, you and I haven't really had this kind of conversation yet, so I'm even very enlightened by it too. There's no one way to go about this, especially in fantasy football. So there's a lot of changes, but it's all about making a plan and game planning. And when they're expecting a right, you throw them a left. That's how it is. And we talked a lot about that when it came to auction coverage as well, when bidding one-on-one against someone else. Let's talk about the first few weeks. Everyone is going to be anxious to spend. Someone at the roulette wheel is spinning, and it may land on someone's first round running back tearing their ACL. And what often happens, you have a couple of teams that want to go all in. Week 1, technically week 2 with waivers. They want to go all in that early. They're so surefire on the running back, then the running back more often than not fails. And especially after last year, where we didn't really get much help when it came to the running back position on the waiver wire, I feel like there might be that desperation to spend because people won't separate last year from this year. What do you think about spending early on? Because that's something that's very hard to avoid.
I mean, it depends on who the players are who are out there. For example, people are running waivers tonight. A lot of people are looking at James Robinson and Divino Zigbo, even Chris Thompson to a certain degree, if he's still available. And here's the thing. Why do you want to be aggressive with a Jacksonville Jaguars backfield? They've got the lowest implied wins total on the season. We know that their defense is atrocious. You know that they're going to be in catch-up mode the entire time. So if I want to go after a backfield there, I mean, I'll go somewhat aggressively on Chris Thompson, because I know he's there on passing downs, and I know he's going to, get some red zone work because that's what Jay Gruden likes. When it comes to James Robinson or Divino Zigbo, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative. I'll throw a bid out there if I've got the empty roster spot or the adjusted roster spot, but I'm not going to go hog wild over these guys because I know that it's going to be limited touches. It's going to be, just limited action. So yeah, I mean, it always depends on the quality of the player. You get a running back who goes down like super early, like, Joe Mixon, knock wood. Joe Mixon goes down in the next day or two, right? Right. You're damn right. You better be aggressive on Travion Williams and Gio Bernard. Like, you have to be aggressive there because that's a primary guy who's out. Going after like just some dude who's going to get snaps as the wide receiver 3 on some team. No, I'm going to pull back and just be very conservative that way.
Yeah, we all remember Kevin Ogletree from a few years ago. All those touchdowns week 1. People spent big, most of their budget, and then we never heard from him again.
What a classic example, right? It's like Ogletree. I mean, that is just so many people bring that up. I mean, it's hysterical. It's like in baseball, I keep bringing up like Chris Shelton, the year that he hit like 13 home runs in the month of April.
Jordan Schaefer, I believe he went double homer his debut game as well from the Braves. He's talking to Rodas about that too. And it's funny because we all have our examples when these situations come up. And when it comes to position eligibility, I think about Joe Webb, the year where he had quarterback and wide receiver eligibility. And I believe championship week 2. So that in week 16, which was also so massive. So we all have our examples, but we got to be careful with those 1 week wonders because, Howard, I try to really never spend 95% of my budget on one player. I mean, I always have in my mind, someone on this team is getting hurt. It's football. It's going to happen, even if they're out 4 or 5 weeks. So I try to kind of keep that in my mind. That way I have some budget left over for my playoff chase.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, listen, you have to, it's funny. I mean, you made a great point earlier when you said people might think about what happened last year and think that might be something that you have to worry about this year as well. And I think that's a horrible way to look at it. So my feeling about it is you always hold something back for the end. Be aggressive when you need to. Expect that you're going to want guys late. But, when it comes to building your roster in fantasy football, for me, I want to play as few matchups as possible. Like, I don't want to keep churning over the roster and looking for the flavor of the week. And when it comes to late in the season, I want to hold something back for Fab just in an emergency basis. I'm not talking about holding back, 30%, 40% of my budget, but maybe 15 to 20% I won't touch until, I know that, I've exhausted all trade avenues and I'm going to need to fix something. So.
Right. And last year, especially with a guy like Rashad Perriman, I mean, I remember I lost maybe a week or two before that. I lost Dalvin Cook, and my soon-to-be finals opponent actually had enough money to pick up Madison and Mike Boone as well. So I was screwed essentially. But what I did, luckily, because Chris Godwin got hurt, was I had enough money to get Perriman. I think I had about $35 at the time to get Perriman, and he was one of the big catalysts for me winning a championship where I was a huge underdog. That's why I really don't go for broke early on in the season, because I remember those instances. And it's when it comes down to one player, you're going to need more than one player. And that leads me to this question for you, because I generally don't spend fab on quarterback and tight end. I've never felt that the pool has been that light where I have to go in heavy on the position. I mean, what do you think? Because I spend most of my money on running backs and then a little bit on wide receivers.
Yeah, it's running backs and wide receivers for me as well. If I'm in a league, here's the funny thing, and this is like a big argument that I've had with Ronis over time. If it's 16 rounds and I come out of the draft, it depends on what everybody's doing in the draft as to whether or not I pick up a backup QB. That I would rather have the security of a QB and not even a guy who I'm going to play matchups with, because that's always what his argument is. He's like, oh man, you get that backup QB and then you're like, well, why am I doing this? Do I have to, play the matchups with this guy all the time? And what if my backup has that? No, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for the safety and security of having one so that I don't have to spend fab. Now, if nobody in your draft is drafting a backup QB, well then okay, then you don't have to do it, and based on the depth that's sitting out there on your waiver wire whether or not that's a move that you're going to have to make or not. Chances are is that if it's just 1 week, let's say you draft Pat Mahomes and you don't draft a backup QB and you're looking for a guy for the I'll go low end and I'll throw a low bid on Mitch Trubisky / Nick Foles. I'll throw in a low bid on Ryan Tannehill or Sam Darnold, whoever's just sitting out there on the waiver wire. I don't want to be aggressive there. And it's the same thing with tight ends. You really don't want to be aggressive with tight ends. Tight ends who, are premium tight ends who see a good number of targets, they're not on your waiver wire right now.
Right.
Dawson Knox is on your waiver wire right now. Will Dissly is on your waiver wire right now. Yeah, exactly. So, it's not a group of guys you really need to be aggressive with. It's not.
When it comes to drafting a backup tight end, I'm all in for that. When it comes to drafting a backup quarterback, it depends on how many spots I have on my bench. That's the other thing as well. If I'm in a 12-team league and there's 5 bench spots, okay, I'm cool. I don't feel the need to draft a backup quarterback. If I'm in a 16-team league, let's just say, and there are 9, 10 bench spots, you have to. Even if you're so anti-grab a second quarterback, you have to at that point, because especially if you're in a casual league, a lot of teams are going to grab that second quarterback, and you're not going to be able to have the opportunity to play the matchups.
No, you're not. But again, I don't want to play the matchups. Like, that's the thing. I mean, people sit there and they'll, it's fine. You want to wait on quarterback, but, commit. I'm not going to sit there and draft Baker Mayfield and Big Ben just so I can be like, well, I'll start Big Ben at home and I'll start Baker Mayfield every other, week for that. I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to lock in a guy. And not have to sit there and just kind of go back and forth and play silly matchups. It's just not. Right. It makes you nuts. You look at the Twitter questions that pop up on a regular basis. Like, do I start this guy? Do I start that guy? Do I start this guy or do I start that guy? And it's like, you know what? Just focus on one dude. I mean, if you really have to, how many times do people sit there and they're like, well, Julio Jones is facing Jalen Ramsey. Should I start Hunter Renfrow because he saw 7 targets last week? No, you start your studs and you use them that way. Like, too many decisions to have to make in fantasy football is problematic, and it's probably counterproductive because, how many times have you just seen people just make that wrong move way too many times?
Right. And that brings me to my next point here of the discussion. And that's having to be somewhat patient and forgiving for the first few weeks of this season, especially. Not a lot of reps, not a lot of training. We were saying the same thing during fantasy baseball, during our third draft month of fantasy baseball, as we were waiting when the season was coming back. You have to be.
I don't even remember. It was so long ago, Fensty.
Yeah. So we had draft months, January, February, March, and then May and June. So you had 5 draft months for fantasy baseball. So that's the thing about patience. I know, nuts, Howard. It's been a crazy time. It has. But that's why we're family strong over here, because we stick together like a family should. And it's okay. It'll be all right, Howard. But let's say one of your studs, and I'm not talking your first or second round pick. I'm talking about, let's just say someone like, Robert Woods. He absolutely sucks in the first few weeks, not really doing too much, maybe getting targeted a couple of drops as well. Don't go dropping Robert Woods after a few weeks. Even if you see 3 sexy wide receivers who you didn't even hear of all of a sudden having a few good weeks, don't drop Robert Woods after 3 weeks. I get it. We're all under the fire. We don't know when COVID is going to take the season away, if they will. We get it. We don't know how much life we have, but don't be stupid.
Don't be stupid. If there you go, that's the whole thing. Like, use common sense, people. Really think about the roster moves that you're making. Think about where you drafted the guy. Maybe Robert Woods, you took him in the 5th round and he did have a slow start to the season. There's a reason you drafted him in the 5th round. And unless you're seeing something so crazy, like, Jared Goff and Van Jefferson are like, with each other, like, then, I would not be concerned. Robert Woods is a guy who's going to eat on a regular basis. Slow starts happen. And like you said, especially in this time right now, where nobody's had a preseason game, we've had very limited workouts and preseason action. These guys are, athletes are creatures of habit. And once you take them out of their normal routine, look at what happens. It's one of those things that, you just see. There's ebb and there's flow. And you have to make sure that you're not overreacting to certain things. My first round guy's a bust. He didn't do anything for the first 2 weeks. Probably not a bust. Probably just a bad situation.
Right. And when it comes to drafting, for those that still have drafts over the next few days, when you're drafting, don't draft with the intention that you're going to make all these deals. This is a different kind of year. A lot of outside factors working against our players. So you have to make sure you have enough depth at both running back and wide receiver. There are players, Howard, that just literally go into the draft with their one sole purpose to get as many running backs as they can so they can control the trade market. And I hate that strategy. And I've told friends that you're being a bonehead. Don't play fantasy football or fantasy sports to trade. It's not like trading basketball cards. Play fantasy sports to win. I'm not going to be impressed if you tell me you made 8 trades. I'm going to ask you, why do you not believe in your own foundation? And then you're going to feel bad. And I don't want anyone feeling bad.
Oh, but you know what? Sometimes you have to make them feel bad about it. I've had to, I've done tough love on Twitter. I've done tough love through the email. It's just, some people just need to understand. It's like, you should not be doing this. I've got a guy. There's a guy. His name is Jerry. I won't give his last name out. But Jerry was just overturning his roster all the time. And he's like just jumping at the flavors of the week. And I'm like, Jerry, stop it. I'm going to stop answering your emails if you sit here and constantly do, like, you ask me my advice. I give you some suggestions. I give you a number of them, and you don't listen to me at all. You just continuously do that. So it's a waste of my time to be corresponding with you. I want you to win, But I mean, this has to stop. And then he sent me an email. You know, he's a senior citizen and he's on a fixed income and very limited time. And this is what he does now.
And now you feel bad.
And then I felt terrible about it. But he sent me an email, another email like that followed that up, being like, "Thank you so much. I do appreciate you telling me like it is, and not just just dismissing me and ignoring my emails." And that's what it's about. We're about teaching the process here. And teaching doesn't just start with, doesn't end with your draft. Teaching throughout the season on how to properly manage your team in season. Like this live stream here, you want to talk about in-season fab, in-season trading, all of this. It's very important. You have to understand, they say sometimes the best trades you make are the ones that you don't make, right? I mean, it's just you have to understand when to do things, when not to do things. And don't just, if you have a great week and nobody gets hurt and your roster looks tight, sit back, relax, and enjoy it, right? If there's nobody out there on the waiver wire who's like, there was no major injury or anything like that, and it's a quiet week, you need to relish those quiet weeks and enjoy them. Otherwise, you're going to make yourself nuts. It's like people asking start-sit questions on a Tuesday. I mean, if you want to talk about a time right now where you shouldn't be asking start-sit questions in the time of COVID, I mean, we're gonna see positive tests on a Sunday morning, and then where are you gonna be at? Oh, you told me to start this guy. I didn't know he was gonna test positive on Sunday. You have to, that's the thing. Like, people really need to make sure that they are paying attention to these little nuances, especially here in 2020.
Yeah, don't set your lineup just once. In fact, you should try to start setting your lineup. So if you're really that forgetful, while you're watching the game, set the lineup for the next week. Put a dummy lineup in there like we do when we enter contests early. So we get those single entry contests for DFS. That's why you do it. So make sure you're setting your lineup. And yeah, this has been a big lesson about now that the draft part is over. Now it's not, let's all just focus on week one and then prepare. It's let's focus on week one, getting our lineup set, getting into a routine and beyond, because that's the next part of the battle. And it's not going to be easy for all the reasons that Howard just mentioned. So make sure that you're paying attention. You're hanging with the family. Howard, Fantasy Alarm is airing on Sirius XM. It's airing 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. What's going on the big show today?
What is going on in the big show today? We're going to take a look at some of the rookies, all the highly touted rookies. Who's going to be somebody you're going to want to start the season with, who's really fallen off the radar for that part there. We're going to be playing against our good friends over at Stat Hero. That's always going to be entertaining, to say the least. And we're just catching up on a lot of the news. We're going to discuss the handcuff report, and who doesn't want to talk DFS, right? So the DFS watch list, it's out there right now on fantasyalarm.com. Jim Bowden and I are going to go over that. Plus some other sneaky plays that we're looking at for this weekend. You don't want to miss it.
So many chances to win, and that's why you're at the place to do it, fantasyalarm.com. Make sure you also catch Alarm After Hours on Sirius XM. That is tonight. We have a few different times now. So Mondays and Thursdays, it will be from midnight to 2 a.m. Eastern. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 1 to 3 a.m. Eastern. I'll be on with Adam Rodas tonight. We'll go over some of the more share report that we have, players that we have a lot of stock in, why we made certain decisions, and then looking at waivers already now, kind of going in a little bit deeper than Howard and I just went, because again, this is about preparing for the season. This is not just preparing for week one. That's how you win. We're going to help you get that game plan to success. And for Howard Bender, at RotoBuzzGuy on Twitter, I'm at Fensty Sports, Fantasy Alarm. That's what we do. We always dominate. No other option. We just win.